something that organizations fail to do when they have an event is to be in front of it. They always tend to wait for somebody else to bring it to public light, and they've lost the narrative. When you're the first person to report, you control the narrative. After that, everyone else controls it. They can call you a liar, they can say that you were wrong, right? They can always come up with counterpoints. But when you're the first to report, you own the narrative now. No one can come in and say anything otherwise. That's a big challenge that we see all the time here is the culture of how people handle threats, how people handle security. There's that whole idea that if the email says it's from the boss, it must be from the boss. I'll do whatever it says. That's part of certain people's cultures. The other part, again, is going back to finding the talent, either people on the ground that you have pulled from, which is limited, or abroad, which becomes very expensive really quick.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the GCS Leaders Series. We've got David Brown here today. He's the Security Operations Director for CyberGate Defense. He's based out in Dubai, and we've had many cyber leaders on this series. Really interesting to get the opinion of someone that works in, a different culture, the Middle East, but sees lots of universality between different cultures about how you run projects, how you prepare for projects, and how you deal with incidents. The great thing about David, other than the fact his name is David B, like myself, is that he's got a really great way of looking and thinking about things, of really simplifying things and putting things into context. David, hi, how are you?
Good, yourself?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Not too bad. It's a Friday today, so always a good day.
Yes.
The sun is out, so yeah. Who knew? Who knew? So it's great to have you. Great to have another David B on the show. Always
Yes.
like to share those. The best name, I think, David. So yeah. But obviously we've spoken to a lot of cyber leaders, but to have someone like yourself who's a security operations director for CyberGate, one of the leading brands, globally, but also kind of within the Middle East, is really interesting for us as we look to kind of expand in both those areas. But before we kind of get into the questions in the chat, David, do you want to give us a little bit of a background about yourself and how you come to be in this position and in that location, really?
Sure. So I started my IT career, I guess, back in Boston at Boston College. I was an information technology consultant for Boston College, helping professors adapt new technology, grow into the technology space. From there, I kind of was forced into security. We had a couple of events back in the day that we didn't know what or how they were, and so we had to develop a security program. So I was tasked to do that. I ended up developing kind of an entire ecosystem package of security tooling to bring together for the university using commercial products. And that got kind of picked up by the Department of Defense and the U.S. government. My project then became a fragmentary order for the entire U.S. government, presidential order that every asset had to run this kind of holistic ecosystem of tools. I then got recruited to go into the government to go help them deploy it, set it up, and evolve it. And so I ended up working for multiple branches of the Department of Defense across the United States, Europe, and into the Middle East as well back in the days. From there, I ended up being requested to go to Saudi Arabia after they had a significant cyber event back in 2011. So I was boots on the ground September 11th, 2011, which is a fun day for traveling. And then ended up spending 30 days was my original TDY, and ended up spending 180 days in that 30-day original deployment. Got back to the States. The Saudis called me up and asked if I wanted to join them full time and move out there and start working for them at the National Oil and Gas Company, Saudi Aramco, and I did. So I moved over there and then spent about 10 years in Saudi working for them, building out their security operations, their threat intelligence operations, forensic capabilities. And then in 2020, September again, I moved to Dubai and started working as a director of security operations for MSPs here in the UAE. I've worked for two, Etihad, which is a Help AG, which is a Etihad company, which is the national telecom. And then, of course, CyberGate, where I started originally and I came back to now, just a few months ago. So, and that's how I ended up over here.
Fantastic. Do you feel, I know a lot of people move to America and always feel like they kind of, like a lot of British people move to America and love it. I mean, obviously you spent a long time now in the Middle East. Is it something that you feel really kind of settled there? Is it kind of
Yeah,
suit your personality? You know, my brother, for
it
instance, lives in
does.
San Francisco, and I always felt he wanted to live in San Francisco, and like he
Yeah.
feels really happy in America. Is it the same for you in the Middle East?
Yeah, so last year I went back to the States. I had an opportunity to go back. And so I went back and I ended up only spending just, less than a year because the things that I had left weren't there anymore, right? Friendships, things like that. When you're so far away and, people move on. One of the things that when we got home, or I say home, we got back to the States, to the area that we left from, we'd meet up with people that we knew and, you'd call them up the next day or send them a message, hey, let's go do lunch. And the response was, oh, I forgot you were back, right? You're no longer in that theory and that sign. So you have to kind of rebuild our relationship back up again. And we've had these relationships here in the Middle East and in the UAE for so long. We decided that, it's we enjoyed the lifestyle we had. We had good times there. So let's just go back. And so we came back, you know.
And for yourself as a kind of a global security leader, what were the key kind of challenges that you see throughout your working in different places, different industries, different sectors? What are you always looking out for that you need to cover, that you need to deal with?
Well, one of the biggest issues that we've seen is the people factor, right? The human factor. Cultures are different, so you have to understand how that takes part of security, for example, right? And also when you're looking at hiring talent pool, right? You have very different talent pools in different parts of the world than you would other places. So if we take, for example, the United States, where you could pull from maybe any state and because you're all in the same country and bring everyone into some place, right? Take some place that's evolving in the United States for technology like the Austin Dallas corridor, right? And you could get people from Maine to California to Alaska to Florida all moving there to work. When you work in another country, your pool is very limited. And if you want to get some unique talent or something like that, now you have to get visas. Now you have to international travel, right? Arrange things like that. I mean, 14 hours from Houston, Texas to Dubai, that's a heck of a commute, right? So you can't really, run that way. And then if you have to get visas for people, and so you're kind of limited with who happens to be on the ground already, or you have to go through the work of getting them in the door. And that may be more expensive in terms of HR than hiring two people that are already on the ground that may not have the skill set that you're looking for in one person, but cost-wise, it may be better off. So that's a big challenge that we see all the time here is the culture of how people handle threats, how people handle security. There's that whole idea that if the email says it's from the boss, it must be from the boss. And so I'll do whatever it says. That's part of certain people's cultures. And the other part, again, is going back to finding the talent, either people on the ground that you have pull from, which is limited, or abroad, which becomes very expensive really quick.
So do you now go have a kind of hybrid model, but would you say that hiring people, training them from the local domain is a good tactic, or is it not possible?
No, it's very good. In fact, that's one of the things that we do here at CyberGate is we have an academy and we
Right.
partner
Okay.
with a major university here. And we actually recruit people out of the university into internships and then offer them jobs. Or what we do a lot of times is we place them into other agencies, particularly government agencies. We'll bring them on. They'll go through our academy at the university, come into an internship in our office and work with our teams. and then we'll place them at government institutions and things like that as juniors and things like that. But they already have some hands-on and some field work on them. So they're coming out with more opportunity to succeed than just coming out of school. So we do a lot of that. And then again, when we're looking for our internal stuff, we're modernizing dramatically. The UAE is very AI focused and quantum driven. And so we're modernizing along with that so we can be a forefront and a leader in that space in the UAE. So we've already developed multiple AI agents that are going to be doing things like triaging, threat hunting, analysis. So we're going through all of these things and rolling them out in real time right now, as long as our quantum upgrade. So we're going to full quantum resiliency and everything like that to be in line with the UAE's drive for technology, to become one of the world's, leading provider of technology services around AI and quantum particularly.
That's so exciting. So, we've talked quite a lot about in recent podcasts, last 6 months, like quantum resiliency, because obviously is it slightly theoretical at the moment, i.e. quantum doesn't exist,
No,
but you are kind of ahead of the game to be resilient to something that doesn't exist
so
yet?
at first they were talking that, you would need like 1,000 qubits to break AES, right? Now they're thinking you only need 100. So instead of it being 2047 when the technology exists to do it, we're now looking at 2037, right? So that makes it a little bit more tangible because that's like 10 years away. And so if somebody's harvesting now to decrypt later, and your data might still have value in 10 years, that's something that you might want to look into. And so you can go quantum resilient in a couple ways. You can either upgrade your existing cryptology. So AES 256 and 512 are classified as resilient standards, but they're not using the new pre-quantum keys. So then you can either then go to the new pre-quantum keys, and you'll see a lot of that happening in the transport layer, TLS, things like that. You'll upgrade them to the new quantum key sets. So that way they're ready for quantum when it shows up in 10, 15 years, if you still have that connection alive.
So just to kind of, because obviously we have a wide range of listeners, and it's really interesting what you're saying, and I think I understand it, but if you could put into kind of words that anyone would understand what that really means. Like if I'm a CEO listening to this and I'm not thinking about quantum and I don't understand what you just said, what does that really mean to me?
What it means to you is that you should start data classification. That's very time consuming if you have not already done it. And once you've done the data classification, choose what you want to encrypt and then make a decision. Is this going to be important 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? And once you have that in mind, now you can say, if it's only 5 years, AES 256. If it's 10 to 15, 512. If it's more than that, then I need to start looking at quantum pre-key encryption techs.
So that means that basically, at the moment, if someone harvested your data, they couldn't use it. But in 10 years' time, the way the trajectory of technology is working, they could use that data. So if you think that's going to be important data, I don't know, like a social security number or passport details, which still exist.
Patents, right?
Right.
Intellectual property, right? Source code, things like that, right? 10 years from now may still be very viable.
It's quite amazing to think, isn't it? Because there's so much when we talk about GDPR and data is about going back, that how long you hold the records for. There's not a lot of talk about how long you got to protect the records for, I guess.
Yeah. And some organizations, like some places are mandatory. You have to keep data for 7 years, right? For certain regulations, things like that. And again, how are you going to store that data? You will probably never need to access that data. But at some point, if you ask for it, you need to have it in a secured way that includes having the, integrity and the confidentiality of that intact. So encryption is the best way to do it. I have to store this bulk of logs for 7 years. I'm just going to encrypt it so that way we know it's immutable in its encrypted form. and we know it's kept, right? So it's over there on that cold storage or that offline hard drive or wherever you might put it, and it's encrypted and kept available. So when somebody asks for it, you'd be like, here it is. And it's encrypted. And if you want to decrypt it, then let's talk and we'll share keys and off we go. Right?
So what's interesting there is, you think quite a lot in cyber about, we've talked about this reacting to events, a hack or a security issue or something like that. But what you're talking about here is a lot of kind of preventative, like preparing against things to happen. Is that kind of style? Yeah. Is that a style that you've changed over the years, or does this go back to what you proposed to the US government all these years ago? Like, be prepared.
Yep. So I always think in two ways, right? I always think of the left of boom and the right of boom, right? So the boom is it's a term that we used in the military for like an IED event, right? You have what happened before the IED went off and what happened after the IED went off. At that point, it's too late, right? So we always focus on the left of boom. And so my theory and what I've always done is when we look at intelligence-driven defense in depth, we're looking at making sure we have as much as we can on that left side, because once we hit the right side, we only have recovery. And if our recovery wasn't prepared to recover, then we're going to be in harm's way, right? If we're not following backup standards like 3-2-1, right? 3 copies, 2 locations, 1 offline, right? Making sure that your backups are immutable as well. Using worm technology if you're going to be writing to disk versus writing to tape, right? Which is write once, read many, right? So again, that backup can't be changed by somebody doing something inappropriate. And then having it in 2 locations. So that goes back to your business continuity, having one of them offline. That way, if both of those 2 locations are, removed or a threat actor gets in there, does some destructive activity, you still have a point in time you can go back to, right? It's about building those resiliencies, building those in-depth processes, right? Because you can't stop every attack every time. And sometimes, as you've been seeing in the media lately, it only takes one threat actor to get in and do one job and destroy an organization or a company or people, right? Very easily, right? It's so simple. But if you have enough in-depth resiliency baked in to detect, harden, your recovery time is very, very short. And you're back up with minimal operational damage, minimal exposure, and minimal reputation loss. Because again, your data is backed up. So the stuff they stole, very difficult for them to use, depending on how they stole it, right? So there's a lot of that stuff. You have classification done with embedded metadata. So the moment it pops up somewhere for sale, you can validate, that's my document, and it's classified as open. I don't care about it, let it stay there. Or it's popped up and it's confidential, right? So now I need to do disclosure, what's in there, what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. Does this hurt my investors? Does this hurt that? But also because you had that classification and you now know that it left the door potentially in the original attack or whatever, you can pre-do that already. Because again, something that organizations fail to do when they have an event is to be in front of it. They always tend to wait for somebody else to bring it to public light, and they've lost the narrative. When you're the first person to report, you control the narrative. After that, everyone else controls it. They can call you a liar. They can say that you're wrong, right? They can always come up with the counterpoints. But when you're the first to report, you own that narrative, right? XYZ happened. We recovered. We called in our teams. We did this. We did that. You own the narrative now. No one can come in and say anything otherwise.
Yeah. Funnily enough, we had, it's not a data breach. We almost had to, we caused a data breach on ourselves, David. We moved some data. We basically we had a brand that we merged together within GCS. We moved their data into another database. in a fine way, and obviously we own the data in that, and then basically putting it into the new database, we sent everyone an email saying welcome to GCS, which, if you can imagine, like, we just moved 30,000 pieces of data from one database to another to close down the old
Yeah.
database. We received a lot of "who the hell are you" emails, and obviously, like you just said there, you know, being ahead of it, like the CEO reaching out to them and saying, this is what's happened. You don't need to worry. You know, there
Yep.
was obviously a lot of cyber and a lot of data people in those emails, so they were very kind of worried about what was happening with their records. But I
Yeah.
think you would agree from this is it's better to be on the front foot, right, and have these conversations and be present.
Correct. Because again, yeah, you own it, you control it. And again, transparency is a key factor in maintaining credibility.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something that all kind of leaders struggle with, because what you're talking about there is like trying to think about whether this data or this IP or whatever is going to be useful in 10 years' time versus now. And how do you balance that? How do you kind of balance out those different, you know, this is really, really urgent because this is happening now versus, well, we still need to be thinking about quantum resiliency in 10 years' time? What's your strategy for doing that? Because in different industries, it's always going to be the same.
Yeah, and that's how it comes down to, right? And it's about having the right tools and people to first do that categorization, right? You have to know what your data is, right? And the owner of the data, and this is something like when we look at like confidential or classified documents from governments, right? The person who created the document determines its classification, right? I wrote this document and I say it's secret. No one can make it anything less than secret from that moment forward. They can make it higher, but they can never go backwards. Only the original author can change that classification down, right? There's one other person, the President of the United States can do that. But outside of these two individuals, that's it, right? And so that's what you need to do. As you're classifying your data, you have to ask the data owner, right? How important is this today, 5 years, 10 years? And you just give them a tracker, right? And you put on a scale. And once you have all that sorted, you can now go through and say, okay, the data over here, that's 5-year data, that's 10-year data, that's lifetime data, right? And now you know the urgency of what to do. You know the criticality of each thing, and you know where to start. Sometimes it's easier to start at the smaller bits and work to the bigger bits. Other times it's the other way around, you know? So if we only have things that we have, let's just say 10 gigabytes of something that needs to have lifetime protection, right? Versus, you know, 10 terabytes or 10, you know, petabytes of data that needs 5-year protection, right? Probably easier to start with the smaller stuff and work down to the bigger stuff.
And it's stuff that we should be doing now, you know, because obviously I think what you're saying there is, if you're encrypting the data, if you're doing the things that you're saying, this links into your point, which we've talked about before, which is cyber hygiene. You know, it's really thinking about setting your stall right now and not leaving any stone unturned. Do you want to just explain to us what you mean by cyber hygiene, David?
Yeah. So when we look at your cyber footprint, right, whether it's your external exposure or your internal exposure, how you manage things, right, we always understand that there are always going to be areas that aren't as maintained as they should be, right? If you're looking at the ability to get to your mail server, right, you allow that from outside and inside. So one missed patch on that, right, is a failure in your cyber hygiene on that versus something that can only be reached from the core of the network. That can probably have a missing patch on it or something like that and doesn't necessarily affect its overall cyber hygiene. But cyber hygiene is about awareness, right? First and foremost. You have to know everything that you have. And so once you know about it, you can now start to classify it. Once you classify its importance or sensitivity, you can now put controls around it, right? It's same thing with, like, we see this in OT and IT operations. We have air gaps networks, we have isolation, we have segmentation. That kind of mindset needs to carry forth into modern ITs as well, right? If you have front desk operators or kiosks, why do they need access to file servers or shared points throughout the network, right? There should be microsegmentation in place there, and adopting the idea of just-in-time access or zero trust, right? Bring that back and forth so that way if I need to access your database server that you talked about from here, I have the rights to do it, yes. My computer has the correct signature or the correct certificate to do it, yes. But I only need it once in a while. So why should I have access all the time, right? I should just have the access when I need it, and then it's revoked again until I need it again. And that can be handled in many different ways. But again, when we look at hygiene, when it comes to cyber footprint, it's about visualization of everything that you have, know where it is, know what it is and what it contains. And then from there, you can build controls around it to secure it. That's the biggest point around it.
And this is, I guess, another thing you find important is why it's important now that the CISO role and security and IT being top of these board levels, because when you talk about these business decisions that are protecting your business, your revenue, your reputation, this has to be a board level conversation, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because at the end of the day, we always like to say negative things roll downhill, right? But accountability goes uphill, right? You can't fault the analyst on the ground or the secretary for doing something wrong, right? When the accountability of it is at that higher level. If there was no policy in place, no training given, right? Or the controls themselves were vastly inadequate to prevent that. And that's something that we've seen a lot too, is the concept of if I can do something, I must be allowed to do it, right? Because if I shouldn't do it, they would have stopped me. Well, that's not always necessarily the case, right? You may have places that poor cyber hygiene that, for example, access to the SharePoint server may allow everyone read access to every SharePoint site on there, right? And so people think that I can read it, so I must have rights to do it. And then they start going through payrolls and all this other stuff, right? Well, yes, they shouldn't have done that. But the accountability of why and how they could do it goes uphill.
It's just an aside there, David. I think we've spoken quite a lot, but accountability goes uphill. You're great for great one-line quotes. I think that's one of my favourites, if you know what I mean. So I think we do these shorts and reels from the thing. Yeah. So I'll make sure they do it. Accountability goes uphill. That's a good one. And shit rolls downhill, doesn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what was the other one the other day, right? Don't worry about things that are in your control because they're in your control. And don't worry about things outside your control because they're outside your control, right?
Yeah.
Your life will be a lot simpler that way, right?
Yeah.
And same thing with the accountability access, right? If I'm the C level, I have the control. So I can build the program, I can build the policies, I can build the controls to meet my level of risk acceptance. And I'm going to sit there and go, my level of risk acceptance is 5 out of a scale of 5, get that signed off by my boss because he's accountable to me, right? Again, accountability goes uphill. Once he's signed off on it, I now know where my program starts. And from there, because I control it, I'm not worried about it because I will build it the way it needs to be built to meet this acceptable risk level. And you just go downhill that way, right?
And, when you think about like different cultures that you've worked in, and I know we talked there about talent and moving it around and how it's hard, but obviously one of the things we've also spoken about in some previous ones is different cultures in different locations. And obviously I'm assuming that potentially in the kind of Middle East versus the United States, for instance, the structure of a business, and I think about maybe, like Europe versus India or something like that, the ways that bosses work, like you said, are there things that you have to take into mind there? Because I'm assuming that command and control structure in the Middle East is much more defined and regimented than it would be in the States, for instance, or not.
It really depends on the environment you're in. Some organizations are very traditional business organizations, right? So your structure, everything is the same there. And then you'll have other ones where you will have people that probably may not be the right person for the job, but they have the right family name, or they're in the right spot at the right time. You have that all the time. Well, even, the US and England, we have a lot of nepotism as well. But you do tend to see that a bit more in certain cultures, because his name is X, he deserves this role just because that's his name, right? Not because he earned it, just because he is who he is, or she is who she is over here, right? So you do get a bunch of that, and I think it comes down to the people then that are in positions to navigate that through policy and through other controls to maybe shield that individual or shield people from the individual, right? Either which direction that needs to happen. And a lot of organizations, when they have some of these in there, they do tend to hire a couple other people to kind of work in that shield role. And I've seen that across the years and across the countries, right? From places I worked with in Australia or South Asia, very common activity in South Asia, to be honest. Here in some parts of the Middle East, Europe, Turkey, for example, again, very common places like that. You'll see that happening a lot there as well. And so it is a challenge, but if you can recognize it, you can potentially work with it.
If you can control it, you can sort it. So yeah, that's right. And if you have a plan. And now, just talking about AI, I mean, we talked about quantum before, and obviously the big thing that's happening now is AI. Does it change? I'm just thinking out loud here. We talk a lot about people, right? What people going to do, how they going to react. But as AI and agents and that sort of thing become more powerful, more ingrained in business, is that something that you have to think about as well? That they might react in a way that you wouldn't expect a person to react, but you don't want them to react in that way as well. They can get scammed. They can give out wrong data.
Correct. And they do it at machine speed, right? So when we're looking
at it really,
at
really, really wrong.
Yeah. So when we're looking at some of the work that we're doing with our own agents and we're looking at some commercial options, we're looking at in-house things, right? We're exploring multiple avenues, right? Because at the end of the day, we want AI to augment our humans, not replace our humans, right? Where AI human in the loop, right? We're not doing what some other organizations have done that you've seen on the news, where they laid off 40% of their workforce for 2 AI agent bots, and then 6 months later had to hire most of those people back. That's a horrible business decision when it comes down to things like that, because you think you're saving money somewhere. But at the end of the day, you have to understand what it's doing. You have to have your guardrails in place. What can the AI touch? What can it look at? What can it respond back to? And then you have to make sure that you're investigating it pretty thoroughly, because hallucination, things like that. So areas where we won't use AI, for example, are like forensic investigations, right? The outcome needs to be human driven, right? Because we can see where the human logic comes from. The AI works kind of inside a box. So if the AI comes out and says, oh, this is X and this is Y, ta-da, and then you take it and it turns out not to be true, there's no backtracking that, right? The AI can make things up and generate things to meet the hypothesis it came up with, because it goes, oh, you told me to look for bad guy here. Well, I couldn't find one, but I know there's one there because you told me there was one there. So
you're going to make one up.
I created what I needed to find to make sure that I found the bad guy, right?
It does that quite a lot, doesn't it? It does like to...
Yeah.
It does like to give... It has to give you an answer, doesn't it? It never says, I don't know.
Yeah. And so that's something very, very complicated when you're looking at it from like a forensic standpoint. So that's why we're not looking at it there. We're looking at it to do areas that help us, right? Again, triaging, analysis, log hunting, things like that. Because again, when we're looking at analysis, that's pretty black and white. The human sitting there and he's looking at a PCAP or something, looking at this network traffic. He goes, oh man, what's on port 787? Right now, I got to go look that up. But with an AI assistant next to him, right, and it can just go port 87 and ding, 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 ding. Here's what port 87 is, right? Here's what this is doing, right? Oh, what service is that executing under, right? And that right there. So again, it's augmenting the human to be faster, right? So the idea is to take a 15-minute investigation lifecycle window and bring it down to about 5 minutes with AI and humans working together, and then eventually bring it down to sub 3 minutes with the AI triage and handling low priority alerts, a lot of stuff that we call noise in the industry, right? That somebody has to look at, right? And then make a determination of, is this, in a 99.9% of the time, it's either a misconfiguration that needs to be corrected, or it's something that happens so often that is benign, it needs to be tuned out. And that's where we are really looking at focusing the AI and going after that space and going, okay, that's noise. It's a misconfiguration between device A and device B. Hear what needs to change to stop this. And then open a ticket, create the ticket, dispatch it to the person responsible for making that change. And that is part of cyber hygiene. Misconfigured devices generating noise is poor hygiene on your cyber front because they're making you blind. You can't see what's behind it. It's kind of like if you ever had a car that knocked and made a lot of noise, when you fixed something, you found something else was wrong, right? Because it's hiding or masking something. So the more that you can detect these misconfigurations, the more you can get them corrected. Now, the program is probably going to run better, right? The people that use it are going to have better service with it. And you've reduced that noise, meaning that the things that you would now see are more likely true positives than what you were seeing before. And that's a big deal. And that's where we're focusing on our first round and bringing our first gen AIs online, is to target that stuff. So that way the human analysts are focusing on the important alerts, the interesting alerts, right? The one where somebody might go, wow, I've never seen this before. Let's dig into this, right? Is this, this is something that could be changing my customer's environment or not, right? So we have to investigate that. We have to do analysis on it, get down to root cause, things like that. But if they were dealing with all that noise, they may have missed that.
Yeah. It's and the way you're talking about it is, I think, from all the conversations I've had, the way that AI enhancing humans, keeping humans in the loop, making the job more interesting, making them focus on the more high value stuff, is the way that many businesses are dealing with it. And I think it's interesting to see whether that actually, how that works. But I think the interesting thing for cyber is you can't get it wrong, can you? That's that's like, I can kind of, as a salesperson, talking in the recruitment phases, I can do something wrong with the way I integrate my AI, and it means that maybe my revenue's less, right? Which obviously means I might not hit my bonuses or achieve what I want with my business, but it's not going to entirely crash the business. Whereas with cyber, there's always that element of jeopardy, isn't there?
Yeah. So for example, like one of the rail guards we're going to put in there is when it starts to do response actions, right? Oh, here's a IP that's doing a port scan of my environment from the outside world, right? It's going to enrich that IP, make a determination of how malicious the IP is, and then put a block in it, right? I'm just going to block down the firewall. So one of the guardrails is that block is only 24 hours, right? So that way, if it does block something like, oh, I just blocked Azure Cloud, or I blocked this, or I blocked a C&D network that's needed for something else, there'll be a short interruption, if there is an interruption, right, until somebody can figure out why or what happened. And again, all of those things will go through and be very clearly labeled. And again, we're having it create all these tickets for everything it does. So we'll see instantly, oh, it created 6 firewall alerts today. and here's all the IPs it created, and here's the enrichment that the platform did that it used to make the determination to block, and they're all set for 24 hours. And then a human can go, you know what, that one's really bad. I can now extend that block to a week, to whatever, right? Because those tickets are there, because again, it's human in the loop. It did the work in seconds. And then during our QC phase and our end of shift turnovers, things like that, they're now going through those tickets and seeing what it did in the background that may need to be made permanent or may need to be backed out, or did exactly what we wanted to do. Great. Give the little sticker that it needs and then move on, because everyone likes stickers.
Going back to accountability then, so when we joked about like accountability, goes uphill. So I don't think I think you're saying that you could never hold an agent accountable. This is not fair to hold the AI accountable. It's always got to be the human that programmed or
Correct.
that is working with. So the human in the loop also means that the human is accountable and responsible for what the agent's doing, right?
Correct.
You can't blame the agent because it's not actually intelligent.
Yeah. And that's why we have, in our instances, that's why we have them create tickets, right? So that way the responsible, accountable person can review the work that's done, right? So we log into our ticketing platform and we can sit there and say, okay, AI agent Bob, right, did this work today? Good. Oh my God. Oh, no, Bob. No. Undo that. And then
Do you
go
give
back
them
to
human names, Dave? Do you give them human names?
Yeah, sometimes, or we give them funny acronyms, right? Because again, at the end of the day, they're going to be part of our ecosystem, right? So just calling it, Agent 1 or Agent 2 isn't, you're gonna be like, what's Bob doing today?
Yeah. Okay.
It's and it gives people a bit more, humor in the day, because security is stressful, right? It's very stressful. So having a bit of levity now and then is important. And I'm sure like the ones when we advertise for customer stuff, we're gonna have cool, snappy, cyber names for them. But internally it might just be, oh, that's
Bob.
Jill, that's Bob.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Bob's brother, Daryl.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I mean, just to kind of like finish off the conversation, has been really good. I'm just going back to what you said about the academy and the people coming into the industry that you're training to become new cyber people. In fact, I think on one of the cyber round tables, there was a conversation about how there's not enough people coming into cyber. Lots of the cyber people are kind of older. We need more people to kind of come into the industry. So what's your advice to them?
I think that's a mix. I think that's a bit mixed, because I see a lot of people coming out with cyber IT things on there, right? Problem is they're the wrong cyber, right?
Right.
Every resume I've seen in the last 5 years, they all want to be pen testers, right?
Right.
Everything they've done, everything, because pen testers are hackers and hackers are cool. Guess what? Don't need them anymore. I literally have a machine and a bot called John, and John does a better job than you do, right? Because again, most of the pen testing stuff is just using a tool to find a hole. Well, I can teach the bot how to use that tool, and he can use it way faster. So I don't need pen testers, right? I don't need, somebody just to go in and say, oh, I can break your Wi-Fi because I captured your, Wi-Fi key doing air snort. Yeah, so did that, and it did it 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the problem I see, is people are coming out into cyber with the wrong background, the wrong skill sets, or wanting to do the wrong thing. Because again, every resume I've seen always has some random, hacker cert on it, or ethical hacker this, or something like that. And great, just because you know how to use, a tool doesn't mean you'll know how to defend against it. Doesn't mean you know what it looks like on the network from a defense standpoint, right? And that's what I need, and that's what most people need, is we need people that are able to think and do things outside those boxes, look where they have blind spots, recognize that, and move forward. And so I rather see people coming out of cyber with more defensive and more wider industry. So some of the best people I've ever hired are former just IT people, like guys, wire pullers, right? Some guy that, ran Cisco's or, patched cables or things like that because they have a core fundamental understanding of how the network works. Same thing, former Active Directory administrators make some of the best defenders because they know exactly how Active Directory works. So when they see something like, oh, that's not right, they immediately see that and can act on that, right? And so I would like to see more people coming out with more diverse IT fundamental knowledge with cyber laid on top of it, because some of the programs out there, they lost that fundamental IT knowledge. They don't know how Active Directory works. They don't know, what LDAP does and how that's important, right? They don't know a lot of the network, how the network works really and where it comes from. And so they're missing out on those fundamental cores, which is why, like you said, a lot of the older people are into cyber because they transitioned from one to the other, and it makes them significantly better in a cyber role.
So when you're talking to people within your academy, they're coming in fresh from a graduate degree or, fresh from somewhere else, what's the advice that you give them to give them a long-standing career in cyber, like yourself? How do they follow your path?
Don't take it personally. Yeah. When something bad happens, you're going to be blamed. And when you're called in to help somebody that had something bad happen, they're going to be angry at you, right? Whether you're going in to do an incident response, right? They're a victim, they're angry, and you're the person they have to bring in to fix it for them. And so things are going to just be thrown out, right? Don't take it personally, right? At the end of the day, when you're sitting on a console watching, bits and bobs fly past you and you miss an alert, it can be very, very bad. Absolutely. If it's your first time, fine. But at the end of the day, we're all human, right? Don't take it personally, right? Things are going to happen. People are going to get upset, and they're not upset at you. They're upset at a failure in a process, right? That's really where they're upset at. You just happen to be the embodiment of the failure in the process, right? So you just have to understand it's not you, it's not your person, it's not who you are. They're angry at the other thing, and you just happen to be there. So stand there.
You got to eat it.
Yeah, eat it. And when you go home, you're like, you know what? I'm going to go watch a movie. I'm going to go take the dog for a walk, right? And just let it wash away. Because if you eat that and take that stress into you, you're going to have a very short cyber career, because it gets stressful on a drop of a hat often, right? You'll go from one day, everything's smooth and shiny, to 2 minutes later, literally everything's on fire.
I always think to myself that IT people and accountants, maybe HR as well, they just bear the brunt of people's frustration, don't they? Me or a manager who's not in that role, maybe a salesperson or someone else, that they like you just said there, it's so right. You've caught in another phrase there, but like you just get blamed. Like people blow up, like because they want to talk to someone and say, how did this happen? Even if they actually made the problem, did the thing themselves, then their own frustration like goes at the IT person or at the accountant or at the HR person,
Yeah. I mean, the great example is the British show there, the IT crowd, right?
Yeah.
You have people like,
great show,
jiggle
by the way.
Wire? Yeah. It's like, I can't print. Did you jiggle the wire? Yeah, I jiggled the wire, right? And it's all these things, right? And so, when you're in cyber, has a rare duality to it, because you are both client facing and not client facing at the same time, right? Because when nothing bad's going on, you're not client facing. You're off in the closet somewhere in the dark underground cave they stuck you in, doing your stuff. But when something bad happens, you're client facing. You're in front of, whether it's an internal, client, okay, your CISO, your managers, whatever, or if you're an MSP, in front of your actual paying clients, right? And so there are many days where you just hope you can stay in the dark closet and keep your head down and go through it. And there are other days where you're just going from, you know, person to person to person, and so it's very difficult in that aspect. So if you start taking it personally, you're going to get burnt out.
Sure. Fantastic. Well, I think that don't take it personally is another great phrase there, David. I think, David, you should just do your own little YouTube shorts of the thoughts of David Brown. I think it'll be a successful one. You could probably get yourself about 1 million followers. So yeah.
When
But
place I was at in Dubai, they used to have a bulletin board, and every time I come up with some thing, they would write it like, "Oh, that's a good one."
That's a good one, a Brownism.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, it's been great to speak to you. I know that obviously you're out there in Dubai at the moment, so hope all is well. And we look forward to kind of meeting up and following your kind of career and the success of CyberGate over the next few years. So thanks very
Excellent.
much for spending time with us.
Well, thanks for the invitation as well, and thank you.